Hello. In the 1990, a series of mysterious disappearances occurred in Adelaide, South Australia. After years of investigation, the police finally found clues leading to an abandoned bank in a remote town. Inside, they discovered 6 large black plastic tubs. When the tubs were opened, a string of major cases was brought to light, causing a sensation across Australia. The story takes place in South Australia, the only state that borders all other mainland states and one of the driest regions on the continent. The capital and largest city is Adelaide, which was established in 1836 and has been voted one of the world's top 10 most livable cities for many years. The main character of the story is Elizabeth Hayden, born in 1961. Her husband Mark Ray Hayden, 40 years old, was an ordinary factory worker. The couple had 2 children, and the family lived in Adelaide. Their home was a wooden house with yellow walls and a black tile floor on a street. Mark went to work early and returned very late every day, being the main breadwinner of the family. Elizabeth was a homemaker, taking care of the daily life of the family. However, no one could have imagined that something so unjust would happen to such a normal family. On November 21st, 1998, during the spring season in Australia, with continuous rain, the Adelaide police received a call from a man named Garion Sinclair. He reported that his sister Elizabeth had been missing since the previous day. He had tried to contact her in every way, but to no avail. That morning, Elizabeth's brother went to her house to look for her, but found only Mark and his 2 nephews at home with no sign of Elizabeth. He asked Mark, who hesitated and said that Elizabeth had left a note and left home. Mark claimed he didn't know where Elizabeth had gone, but her brother didn't believe his story. He knew his sister loved her 2 children very much and would never leave them without reason, so he sought police help for an investigation. Upon receiving the report, the police immediately went to Elizabeth's house. Mark informed them that their relationship was in bad shape and was nearly over. The previous day, he had taken the children out, leaving his wife at home alone. When he returned in the evening, he couldn't find his wife and found a note on the dining table. The note stated that their marriage was over and that she was leaving for good. Mark told the police that after reading the note, he initially didn't believe his wife would leave the children and go away alone. So he asked the nearby neighbors. Some neighbors mentioned seeing Elizabeth talking to 2 men before disappearing. Hearing this, Mark believed his wife had truly left. The police then questioned the surrounding neighbors, and one confirmed Mark's account. They said they saw 2 men talking with Elizabeth, after which the men entered the house for a while, and then left. However, when they left, they carried a large, heavy-looking black plastic bag, possibly containing something substantial. They loaded the bag into a car and drove away. With this clue, the police suspected the 2 men were highly suspicious, and believed this might be a murder case given that numerous disappearances had occurred in Adelaide in recent years. Before their disappearances, the victims usually told their families that they were moving to another place to live. In Elizabeth's case, her husband also found a note in which she stated that she would never return. This detail had many similarities to previous cases, raising significant suspicion for the police. A previous missing person was Clinton Trezise, 22 years old. He lived alone and grew up in a boarding school, leading a reclusive life with very few friends. This case occurred 3 years before Elizabeth's case emerged. Clinton was reported missing in 1995, but investigations later revealed that he had actually disappeared in 1992. Since then, no one had seen him. Due to the long passage of time and the few clues available, the case had become a cold one. 1 year before Elizabeth's case, in 1997, a man named Barry Lane was also reported missing by his family. When the police investigated, they discovered that Barry was one of Clinton's friends who had disappeared earlier. The 2 had a close relationship and had lived together 2 years before Clinton's disappearance. Barry was 42 years old when he vanished. He was a transgender individual who often dressed as a woman, a habit his mother despised, leading to frequent arguments between them. Before Barry disappeared, he called his mother. During the call, he cursed at her and said he was moving to Queensland and would never return. Although Barry and his mother had argued many times before, he had never mentioned leaving home. During the call, his mother noticed that Barry's voice was shaky, and his tone was strange, as if he was being forced. She also occasionally heard the laughter of several men in the background. After Barry disappeared, his mother contacted his boyfriend, but he said they had broken up and he didn't know Barry's whereabouts. Feeling something was wrong, she reported it to the local police, but years passed without any trace of Barry. Besides Clinton and Barry, there were several other disappearances in the area, and the police gathered information on these cases. Upon compiling the data, they found that most of the missing persons lived alone, with some being disabled individuals living on monthly allowances. The police followed this lead and discovered that the monthly allowances of the missing persons were still being withdrawn after their disappearances. Two possibilities were proposed. Either the missing persons had moved to another city and were living there, or their bank accounts had been stolen. Upon further investigation, the authorities found that all the welfare money was being withdrawn from an ATM in North Adelaide at fixed times each month. This raised another suspicion, as if the missing persons had moved to other cities, the withdrawals would likely be spread across various locations rather than concentrated in Adelaide. The police continued to follow the leads and obtained surveillance footage from the ATM. After investigating, they found that the person withdrawing the money was a man in his mid-20 years old. His name was Robert Joe Wagner, 27 years old, living in Adelaide. Additionally, he was Barry's ex-boyfriend who had disappeared earlier. The two had met when they were 13 years old. From 1985 to 1996, the two had lived together as lovers for 11 years. The police then approached Robert and questioned him. Robert stated that in October 1997, Barry had broken up with him and said he was going to Queensland. Before leaving, Barry had given Robert his bank account number so Robert would withdraw money from the ATM each month. Naturally, the police did not believe Robert's statements. Afterward, they tracked Robert and discovered that he frequently visited the home of John Justin Bunting, 32 years old. They had a close relationship, particularly because John was also a neighbor living near the missing Elizabeth's house. Additionally, they were acquainted with Elizabeth's husband. During the investigation into Elizabeth's disappearance, the police learned that John often visited the couple's home. On the day Elizabeth disappeared, a neighbor saw two men carrying a black bag into a car. Those two men were John and Robert. This was not the first time they had been targeted by the police, as they were also suspected in another disappearance case of Suzanne Allen, 47 years old. She was John's ex-girlfriend and had vanished 2 years before Elizabeth's case. Witnesses had also seen John and Robert loading something into a car after Suzanne disappeared. They immediately became the prime suspects, but the police couldn't find any evidence to convict them, so they were released. Another victim was Ray Davies, 26 years old, who was disabled and lived alone. He had a camper parked near Suzanne's house, which was also his home. Ray had disappeared a year before Suzanne was reported missing. Since Ray lived alone and had no family, no one noticed his disappearance until 3 years later in 1998, when the police became aware of it. By then, there had been a total of 5 mysterious disappearances in Adelaide, and all the missing people were acquaintances of John and Robert, which further aroused the police's suspicion. The police decided to question them further, but John and Robert denied any involvement in the disappearances. They claimed they had not visited Elizabeth's house on the day she disappeared and insisted someone was framing them. Due to a lack of evidence, both were released shortly after. However, the police did not give up on the investigation. They closely monitored the two men and eventually made new discoveries. The police learned that John, Robert, Elizabeth's husband Mark, and another man named James Spiridon Vlasakis, 19 years old, and John's stepson often gathered at Mark's house. The police suspected the four were plotting something, so they installed a listening device in Mark's house. Soon after, the police found out that Mark had rented an abandoned bank using a fake name in a small town north of Adelaide. That town was Snowtown, a primarily agricultural town about 150 kilometers from Adelaide, with a population of just under 500 people. Even during the day, the streets of this town had very few passers-by. Any unfamiliar person or new vehicle passing through would attract the locals' attention. The house that Mark rented was an abandoned bank, a two-story red brick building in the town center. The first floor had a steel gate facing the street and a few houses nearby. From the listening device, the police learned that the purpose of renting the bank was to store some things, but they did not specify what those things were. To avoid detection, the police did not immediately check the bank, but continued to monitor the four men. After a period of surveillance, the police did not gather any further clues. On May 20th, 1999, 5 months after Elizabeth's disappearance, the police went to the abandoned bank that the four suspects had rented in Snowtown. The exterior door of the bank was made of very sturdy steel and could not be opened from the outside, so the police had to enter through a side door. Once inside, the first area they entered was the bank's dining area, which had some dining utensils and a few tables. To the right, there was a closed door that, when opened, led to the bank's lobby and resting area. In the hall, there were several boxes filled with various electronic components and products. On the floor, there were some TVs and computer monitors in need of repair. Hanging on the door near the counter was a plastic bag containing purchase receipts for items like air conditioners, rubber gloves, and garbage bags. Inside the bank was a vault with a milk-white door secured with a combination lock that couldn't be easily opened. The investigators used some technical methods to open it successfully. Right in front of the door, the first thing that caught their eyes was a wall made of black nylon bags stuck together. Between the vault door and the wall, they found a wallet, a roll of tape, keys, writing paper, and other items. A police officer tore down the nylon bag wall, and suddenly a foul stench rushed out. The inside of the vault was pitch black, so they had to use flashlights to see. On one side were 6 large black plastic barrels, sealed with screw caps. On one of the barrels was a card and a pair of silver handcuffs next to a black-handled knife. On another barrel were 2 identical black-handled knives and a pair of green rubber gloves. On the other side of the vault was a light blue chair on which was a white plastic tray with 8 knives. Next to it were 2 boxes of disposable gloves, a saw with a wooden handle, and an object resembling a belt. On another chair were 3 white plastic bottles, each labeled hydrochloric acid. Additionally, items like air fresheners, a pair of shoes, and garbage bags were found inside. When they opened one of the black barrels for inspection, an overpowering stench immediately filled the air, a smell the officers would never forget. Inside the barrel, they found human legs and other body parts, leading them to suspect there were many human body parts inside. There were 6 such black plastic barrels in total. Realizing the severity of the situation, they immediately called for backup. Upon receiving the report, many police officers arrived at the scene and sealed off the building. The investigators opened all 6 barrels, and the scene inside was indescribable. After working for some time, they were able to reassemble a total of 8 skeletons but were missing 1 leg. Shortly after the identities of the 8 victims were revealed, they were all confirmed to be the missing persons, including Elizabeth. At the scene, the police found wrenches, electrical wires, rubber gloves, and other crime tools. It was suspected that these 6 black plastic barrels had been in the building for some time but were only recently moved to the vault. This was not the primary crime scene. On May 21st, 1999, one day after the plastic barrels were discovered, the police arrested 4 suspects on suspicion of murder. Investigators brought sniffer dogs to conduct a secret search of all 4 suspects' homes. As a result, they found additional remains of 2 more victims, a man and a woman buried underground in John's backyard. By that time, a total of 10 victims had been found, including 8 men and 2 women. Most of the victims lived alone and had some unique interests. Most of the victims were relatives or friends of the suspects, while some had acquaintances with the 4 suspects. After the 4 were arrested, Mark and James confessed to the crimes and identified John as the gang leader. Before each crime, John would choose the target, and the 2 also admitted to 2 other cases, including Clinton. 2 years after Clinton's disappearance, the police found his body in a mountainous area. At that time, investigators could not identify the victim. Their next victim was Thomas Trevelyan, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and joined the gang in 1997. Thomas lived with the four of them for several months and participated in Barry's murder. However, Thomas had secretly told others about the crimes he had committed. This act of Thomas was discovered by John. John was worried that Thomas would betray him, so he lured him into the mountains and killed him to cover up the crime. Thomas's body was later found hanging from a tree branch. The police at the time only thought he had a mental illness and committed suicide, so they did not investigate further. According to the confessions of James and Mark before carrying out their attacks, they would force the victims to reveal their bank card passwords and record them on 6 plastic containers. Over the years, this gang has earned a total of $95,000 AUD. The main perpetrator of this series of murders was John, who was born in Queensland in September 1966. When he was only 8 years old, he was abused by the brother of a friend, which left an indelible psychological scar. Because of this, John hated people with unusual habits and felt he was being treated unfairly because he was not strong enough. After growing up, he began to advocate violence and became the leader of this cruel gang. In 1988, when John was 22 years old, he worked at a slaughterhouse, a job that brought him unprecedented joy. 3 years later, he quit his job and moved to a house in Salisbury, north of Adelaide. Here he met Robert and Mark, 2 neighbors. The 3 of them often chatted with each other, and John often expressed that he particularly disliked certain things. This was supported by the 2 neighbors. John later created a spider web on the wall at home and pasted the names of people he suspected of having peculiar characteristics. Sometimes he would randomly select someone and call them to insult them. During this process, he learned that Clinton had a special habit, so he planned to kill his opponent. John invited Clinton to his house and then attacked him with a shovel while he was watching TV. Afterwards, he buried Clinton in the forest, which was his first crime. One of the 4 murderers, Robert, also had some special interests. He and Barry were lovers and had joined the gang together. One day, John accidentally learned that Barry also had some special interests, so he collaborated with others to eliminate him. They forced Barry to lie to his mother that he was leaving and then forced him to reveal his bank card password. Barry was also killed after revealing the password to them. One time, Suzanne, John's former girlfriend, told him that her children had been harassed. The man who harassed them was Ray, 26 years old, living in a camper van near her house. John believed that Ray had intellectual disabilities and lived alone, so even if he disappeared, no one would notice. One night, he and some accomplices sneaked into Ray's van. After Ray revealed his bank card password, they murdered him and buried him in John's backyard, then sold Ray's van and continued to collect his welfare benefits. Over the following years, this gang committed many other crimes. In 1995, John married a single mother with 3 children, one of whom was James, who was 16 at the time. John frequently conveyed negative ideas into the mind of this stepson, and gradually James was brainwashed and began to hate people with certain habits. James told John that he had a half-brother with the same habit, and this half-brother was also murdered. During that time, John's gang recruited some new members, and one of them also became a victim of murder. Elizabeth was a member of the gang, and she participated in hiding the victims, but did not directly commit the crimes. On November 20th, 1998, John and Robert visited Mark's house, but Mark was out with his 2 children, leaving Elizabeth alone at home. Elizabeth was dressed provocatively, which made John feel she was trying to seduce him and was unfaithful to her husband. Consequently, he killed Elizabeth. When Mark returned home that evening, John recounted everything to him. Instead of getting angry, Mark laughed and lied to the police about his wife. On May 9th, 1999, a few days before all 4 were arrested, they committed another crime. This time, the victim was 24-year-old David Johnson, James's half-brother. David had fair skin and dressed neatly every day. James and David had a close relationship and could talk to each other about almost anything. When John saw David Johnson, he believed David also had peculiar habits and planned his crime. Upon hearing that David wanted to buy a cheap used computer, John lured him to Snowtown, and David trusted him enough to follow. That night, James drove David to an abandoned bank. Once inside, David was unexpectedly attacked by Robert, James's accomplice. They forced David to reveal his bank card password. Initially, David refused to confess, but after being tortured, he eventually gave in and provided the password. James and Robert immediately withdrew money from David's account, but found that the password he provided was incorrect. When they returned to the bank, they found David had died. Out of revenge, they used gruesome methods to deal with one of David's legs. This is why when the police found 8 bodies in plastic barrels, one leg was missing. One of the 2 victims found in John's backyard was Suzanne. However, John and his accomplices insisted that Suzanne's death had nothing to do with them claiming she suddenly died from a heart attack. Due to lack of evidence, Suzanne's case was not included in the official records. After their arrest, John and Robert adamantly refused to plead guilty, but James and Mark became witnesses, exposing the entire crime and signing plea agreements. The evidence in the case was substantial, and prosecutors had to clarify each person's involvement, leading to separate trials. In 2001, James's trial took place at the Supreme Court of South Australia. James pleaded guilty, and the trial lasted several months. On June 21, 2001, James was convicted of 4 counts of murder and sentenced to 4 life imprisonments, with a minimum of 26 years without parole. A year later, on October 14, 2002, John and Robert's trial began at the Supreme Court of South Australia. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence, including images of bodies in plastic barrels at the bank, recordings of victims' deaths, and other evidence. Due to the horrifying evidence, one of the 12 jury members withdrew due to discomfort from viewing it. Subsequently, 3 more jury members withdrew for various reasons, including needing psychological treatment. According to the law, if a jury member withdraws, the trial must pause and a new jury must be selected. This trial process lasted for 12 months and became the longest trial in Australia's history at that time. On September 8, 2003, after deliberation, the 12-member jury reached a final conclusion. The court convicted John and Robert of murder. John was sentenced to 11 life imprisonments with no possibility of parole, while Robert was sentenced to 10 life imprisonments, also without parole. After sentencing, both were transferred to Yatala Prison, a facility primarily for male prisoners in Adelaide. A year later, on August 2, 2004, the last person involved in the case, Mark was sentenced to 25 years in prison for aiding and abetting with a non-parole period of 18 years. The brutality of this case shook Australia to the extent that the government issued a ban on disclosing certain details of the case. Only later, when part of the ban was lifted, were some details made public. Snowtown, where the crime occurred, became infamous after the incident. Many curious tourists visited, contributing to the local economy to a certain extent. However, ultimately, what happened there was not something to be glorified. To change the public's perception of Snowtown, the local government planned to rename it Rosetown, but as of now, this plan has not been implemented.
On the eve of Before Christmas, 2000, a 16-year-old girl named Leanne Tiernan, along with her best friend Sarah Whitehouse, went to a shopping center in downtown London to buy Christmas gifts. After finishing their shopping, the 2 girls parted ways and took the bus home. No one could have imagined that Leanne, an optimistic girl with outstanding academic achievements, would not return home. This became one of the largest and most resource-intensive search operations in the history of British crime investigation. The City of London, where the incident occurred, is the 3rd largest city in England and has the 2nd largest economy in the United Kingdom after the capital. It is a wealthy and desirable place to live. Leanne, the main character of this story, was born on September 28, 1984. Her parents divorced when she was young. Leanne was an optimistic and strong girl with excellent academic performance at West Leeds High School. She was not only cheerful but also very confident and well-liked by teachers and friends at school. However, a tragedy struck Leanne just before Christmas in 2000. November 26, 2000 was a Sunday, so Leanne didn't have to go to school. She had arranged to meet Sarah, her best friend, at the shopping center in downtown Leeds to buy Christmas gifts. The two girls had a good time together before getting on the bus to head back to the northwest of Leeds. After getting off the bus, the two girls started walking towards a hotel where they said goodbye and each walked home. Leanne had to walk along a dark path through a small forest to get home, while Sarah's house was not far from there. Upon reaching home, Sarah immediately called Leanne to check if she had arrived safely. However, Leanne's mother answered the phone and said that her daughter was not home yet. This made Sarah feel uneasy because although their homes were not far from where they parted ways, she had already arrived home while Leanne had not. Leanne's mother, Sharon Hawkhead, also began to worry, but tried to reassure herself that perhaps her daughter had stopped by some friends' houses on the way home or had something to do nearby. She decided to wait a little longer to see what would happen, but even after 30 minutes from when the two girls had parted ways, Leanne had not shown up. This was very unusual because if Leanne was going anywhere, had something to do, or met any friends, she would always call home to inform them. However, this time she didn't. Worried sick, Sharon called Leanne's mobile phone, but it just rang and then went to voicemail. She tried calling several more times but still couldn't reach Leanne. By 7 p.m., Leanne had still not returned home, causing Sharon to fear that something bad had happened to her daughter. She decided to report her daughter's disappearance to the police. Upon receiving the report, the police immediately launched an investigation and dispatched officers to Leanne's house. They planned to conduct a search operation starting around Leanne's home, with the investigation beginning from the spot where the two girls parted ways. On her way home, Leanne had to pass through a forest named Howley Gill, a wild area with dense trees which was highly likely to be where the disappearance occurred. The police mobilized more than 200 people along with volunteers that night to search the entire forest in hopes of finding Leanne or any clues. Unfortunately, the first day's search yielded no results. On November 27th, when the police traced Leanne's mobile phone, they discovered that it had been turned on briefly before being permanently switched off. They continuously called the phone, but no one answered. The police then expanded their search operation, inspecting around 800 homes, garages, and 150 shops within an 800-meter radius of the forest, but they still found no suspicious clues. Even helicopters and sniffer dogs were deployed in the search, but they provided no useful results. Determined not to give up, the police continued by collecting DNA samples from 140 men in the area. Other agencies such as West Yorkshire Police, the Water Police, the Traffic Police, and the National Search Centre were also mobilized to assist in the search for Leanne. Despite these efforts, they could not find any leads, though they believed Leanne was still alive. As time passed, the chances of finding Leanne dwindled. On December 3rd, a week after her disappearance, local residents joined the effort. A local businessman voluntarily donated £10,000 as a reward for anyone who could find or provide useful clues to the police. Leanne's family hoped that someone could offer clues related to her disappearance. With media attention, the police received many calls from people claiming to have seen someone resembling Leanne. However, after verifying all the information provided, there were no promising results. Leanne's parents agreed to be interviewed by the media, publicly thanking the public for their support and assistance. They emphasized that the family had never given up searching and always hoped for Leanne's safe return. On December 4th, 9 days after the incident, a witness reported to the police that around 5 p.m. on November 26th, the time when Leanne went missing, they saw a man walking a dog near the forest. Although the man's identity was unknown, the witness described him as being about 1.73 meters tall, slightly overweight, with a round face covered in red spots and scars, wearing a black beanie, a coat, and jeans. With the witness's help, the police created a composite sketch of the man and released it widely, hoping someone could identify him. The investigation's scope was further expanded, with the police searching approximately 1,750 buildings, 32 wells and drainage pipes within a 3.2 kilometers radius. The case became the largest search operation ever conducted in West Yorkshire, with even household waste collection temporarily halted so that police could examine all the area's trash bins for clues. Sadly, the investigation stalled due to a lack of crucial leads, and Leanne remained missing without a trace. On August 20th, 2001, 9 months after Leanne disappeared, the police received a call from a man who said he was walking his dog near Lindley Woods when he stumbled upon a tightly wrapped object that resembled a human body. Frightened, he immediately called the police. Upon receiving the call, the police swiftly arrived at the location and upon opening the wrapped object, discovered a lifeless body inside. The body was wrapped in a floral duvet, with a black plastic bag over the head and a leather collar around the neck. The victim's body was encased in 9 green plastic bags with the hands tied behind the back. After the identification process, the police confirmed that the body was Leanne Tiernan, who who had been missing for over 9 months. The cause of death was determined to be mechanical asphyxiation. Strangely, the body was very well preserved. Cryobiology experts examined the heart tissue and microstructure, concluding that Leanne had been killed and placed in a refrigerator before being discarded in the forest a few weeks prior. The forensic doctor discovered that the barbed wire tied to her body was a special material produced by a company in Devon, with only a small batch sold on the market. Additionally, red nylon threads were found on her clothes, and a hair on her neck was identified as belonging to a man, likely the perpetrator. Based on this information, the police concluded that Leanne's disappearance had turned into a murder case, which they dubbed Operation Conifer. The location where the perpetrator dumped the body was made public, and locals or anyone frequenting the area were asked to contact the police with any relevant information. Following the discovery of the crime, the police received numerous leads from various sources and collected DNA samples from about 200 people. One of the suspects, John Taylor, born on August 27, 1956, and from Leeds, caught the police's attention. He had divorced his wife about 4 years earlier and currently lived alone near Leanne's home, approximately 1.2 kilometers from the crime scene. The police collected his DNA because witnesses had seen him lingering around the crime area. Neighbors described Taylor as a kind and reliable person who kept many small animals at home. During the investigation, a crucial clue was found. The leather collar around Leanne's neck was produced by a company based in Nottingham. This company had sold 220 similar products to various retailers, and upon checking with the 112th retailer, they confirmed selling these items only by special order. Among the 3 orders delivered to the Leeds area was Taylor's, making him the prime suspect. Moreover, the police discovered that the yellow cables around the victim's neck and hands were manufactured by a company in Italy. This company stated that 99% of their yellow cables were sold to a multinational courier and logistics company in the UK named Royal Mail and its subsidiary, Parcel Force Worldwide. The suspect Taylor worked for this subsidiary. DNA results from the lab further strengthened the evidence when John's DNA matched perfectly with the male hair found on the victim's body. The police also noted some peculiar details related to the evidence at the crime scene. On October 16, 2001, nearly 2 months after Leanne was found, the police collected crucial evidence and promptly arrested John. During the search of his house, they found 3 large refrigerators along with some yellow cables and green plastic bags similar to those used to tie up Leanne. Most importantly, the police discovered some threads on a nail on the floor, which when analyzed matched the threads found on Leanne's clothes. Pollen experts also collected and analyzed flower samples from Taylor's garden, which corresponded exactly with the pollen found in Leanne's nose, skin, and hair, proving she had been in the garden before her murder. Faced with this undeniable evidence, John Taylor admitted his crime. He claimed that on August 26th, the day Leanne disappeared, he encountered her in the wild Howley Gill Forest, grabbed and tied her hands, and took her to his home. He stated that he accidentally killed Leanne during a struggle. However, the police did not believe his statement and thought that John had premeditated the attack on Leanne. After committing the murder, Taylor decided to kill the victim to silence her, using the cables to strangle her to death. Nonetheless, his confession did not match the evidence collected by the police. John claimed that out of fear, he immediately disposed of the victim's body in Linley Wood. However, police information indicated that the victim's body had been stored in a freezer for a long period before being discarded. On February 15, 2002, more than a year after the incident, the trial took place at Leeds Crown Court. Here, John admitted to kidnapping and murdering the victim. The police also discovered other sexual assaults in the area near the forest and suspected that he might have committed more crimes in the past. The investigation revealed that the manner in which the murder was carried out and the body was concealed were meticulously planned by John, indicating that he was a professional killer. Ultimately, the court sentenced John Taylor to life imprisonment. Upon reinvestigating previous cases, the police found that on March 1, 1989, a 21-year-old woman was at home when a masked man broke in, forced her into the bedroom, and raped her at knife point. After analyzing and comparing DNA, they confirmed that the perpetrator was John Taylor. On February 2, 2003, John Taylor stood before the court and confessed to 2 old cases. More horrifyingly, dozens of unsolved cases, including 5 murders, were believed to be linked to him. Authorities asserted that he might have been a serial sexual predator for the past 25 years. Ultimately, John Taylor was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Leanne's family held her funeral on September 28, 2001, which would have been her birthday, but she will forever remain 16. This story teaches us the importance of being cautious of others, especially for women when alone, as dangers can unexpectedly arise. How do you feel about today's case? Leave a comment so we can discuss. And if you liked it, don't hesitate to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.